I'm Dollie Miller, Dollie. Not quite the Irish spelling because that's E-Y, Dolly. There was a big controversy over the naming. And I'm saying that because my mother and her father were Irish. My father was from Barbados. And he didn't like the name, but I got it anyhow. Uh, and my last name before Miller was Squire, Squire, and I never give that part up. And then Miller, Miller, Miller.
And I
And
understand you met your husband at college. Will you tell us
yes,
about
we
it?
were in a history class, and I didn't like the class, and he was very good with the dates and all of that stuff, and it just happened. It was meant to be.
What
um,
what year was that you met?
oh, my stars. 1945, 46. Yeah, that was a long time ago.
He had already been in the war and had come
Yes,
home.
yes. And I was a sophomore then at Bethune-Cookman College. And Bethune-Cookman College, as he pre-stated, that was our family school. My aunts had gone there. My mother had not gone to Bethune-Cookman College. She and my father went to Edward Waters High School in Jacksonville, Florida. And that's where they got married. My oldest sister was born in Jacksonville. And then they came back after a while to Polk County, Winter Haven, Bartow. And my father ran business places in the mining towns, the open pit mines around Polk County. That was in Frostproof and Mulberry, Fort Michaels mines, and then into Winter Haven in the citrus belt. And we were not poor, we were not rich, but we were, as they said at that time, good livers.
Good livers. Okay,
My,
so did you have sisters?
oh, yes, I'm the youngest of seven, and Gilbert is an only child. What a combination.
Oh, did the others go to college too?
No, my father died when I was three, and of course, she had to sell off things, and my oldest brother then was in charge of the family. And at an early age, after high school stopped after 10th grade in Polk County. And he went to Miami, and with the goodness of the Jewish people on Miami Beach, my brother was the first African American person to own a business on Miami Beach. He owned his own parking lot. And of course, when I went to school, my brother and my sister Lillian, who never had children, were my, I suppose, sponsors. And when I went to school with my, which was really great during that time, my own banking account. You know, there was not another girl there like Dolly Squire, and because I could write my own checks, and that was great. Of course, I knew that I was on a budget too, so I never overspent.
Just the fact that you had it, that's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
And those were your siblings that really paid for your college education?
Yes, yes. My brother and my grandfather, my mom's dad, who was a veterinarian. Of course, they were not called veterinarians then. When Papa started, they were called horse doctors because they came from Ireland and followed the horse trade down into Kentucky. They came through Indiana and then down into Kentucky, and then he migrated. I think Papa was a Rolling Stone, and he finally married my grandmother, who was a black person. She was a little black girl, and he was this tall, handsome fella, and he saw her and he says, I think I want her for my wife, and he did get her, and they had 7 children. My mother was the oldest, and he always called my mom Belle of the Coast. Her name was Belle, and I always thought it was because, with all the stories that Papa told me, because I was one of his redhead favorites. There were 3 of us that were redheads. And Papa said that he helped to settle the West, and I think it was in the brothels.
So Papa was your grandfather?
Yeah.
And you knew him?
Oh, yes. Papa died when I was a senior in high school. He died the same day that President Roosevelt died.
So he lived much longer than your father
Oh, yes.
in your life.
Yes,
I mean,
and every Wednesday was our day that he came to our house and sat at the head of the table. And I don't eat Irish stew because we had it every Wednesday.
so when you were talking about the Irish songs on the cruise or the vacation, it
Yeah.
was because did he sing to you?
Oh, well, Papa did a jig when at the family reunion. We didn't. It wasn't really called a family reunion. It was for their anniversary, and that was every year. All the girls came home with their children, and we had a big time. And yes, Papa drank, and Papa would do a jig. And Papa died when he was 93, cancer of the throat. But until he passed away, he would do the Irish jig for us. Yeah.
Of course, there was much mixed blood, but so seldom did the grandfather become a member of the family like yours. So,
Yes. Well, this was common in Polk County. There was a lot of this in Polk County. Imperial Polk. Yeah. You got a lot of polka dot families.
so then there was no I mean, it wasn't. You didn't feel unusual.
No, no. This was just a way of life.
And did the white father stay with the family like yours did?
No,
Well, that's what
they
I
kept
mean.
two families. They kept two families, but
But
wife
yours
knew it.
was your
Yeah.
grandfather.
Papa stayed. They stayed, as Gilbert told you about the railroad. We stayed on this side of the railroad, and they stayed on that side of the railroad. But I was born in his house because all of the girls went back home to have their babies. And
And your grandmother was his only wife.
yeah,
wasn't it?
oh yes, Susie,
Okay.
Susie Stiles Taylor. They changed their name from O'Toole to Taylor. So because they were treated badly, also nobody wanted them around either. So it was just that way.
How interesting. There are many stories here.
Oh, sure.
They are.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us about coming to Stewart.
Coming to Stewart. When we got on the train coming to Stewart in 46 or 47, we got here. There were two train tracks in Stewart then. This was the old Stewart with the depot downtown. And if you were going south, you were on the right-hand side going down, and you had to wait until the train passed, and then there was a little platform that you crossed over to the depot so you could get your luggage. We got here in the middle of the night, morning. There was nothing, and when we crossed over and I looked at Gilbert and I said, "Is this it?" I could see the Stewart department store and Green's department store, and that was it. So where are the taxis? He said, "Somebody will be along in a few minutes." The police came along, and he waved him down. He said, "Where you want to go?" He said, "Out to Wedworth Lee's house." That was the taxi, the police. I could not believe this. I wanted to scream, "Get me back to Miami, Winter Haven, someplace but not here." Well, that wasn't all of it. The next day, he got his uncle to take us out in the hammock. And we rode and rode through Port Salerno, which was ungodly at that time. Boy, did it stink, because they had the shark industry there. And, well, his mom was so happy to see me, and his dad just thought, "Oh, I was the best thing since sliced bread. This is going to be their daughter-in-law," and they never had a girl. And I was leery because down there in the hammock, we went through this dirt road that went down to their house, and these little things were biting me and I couldn't see them. And I was just rubbing and burning, and I looked at Gilbert's dad, and he kind of smiled and he said, "Honey, those are the sun gnats. You will get accustomed to them later." I never did get accustomed to them later. But he was the nicest person. Both of them were. It was never the daughter-in-law kind of thing. They wanted a daughter so badly, I think, that I was just accepted. They were two very nice, very religious people. And that was just the way they were. And talking about the food, it was Bahamian, basically. And they were the only people in the hammock that had ice. They had a kerosene refrigerator that they'd ordered, I think, from Montgomery Ward or Sears. But anyway, they had this, and she would make ice so that everybody could have a little cool water at dinner time. She always made up the ice so because they were the only ones who had it. And it was just so nice of her. And until she passed away in her later years at 88, she lived with us because she had an accident right in Hope Sound at US 1. A truck hit her car, and she knew then that she could not live on her own anymore. She was like 85, I think, at that time, 84, 85, and then she knew that she had to come and live with us. We had extended the invitation. And when she passed away, it was a real hard time for me and for Gilbert, but especially for me because she had just been my baby.
What a lovely story.
Love that lady.
So they didn't have electricity in the hammock.
Not until Gilbert came back from college. When Gilbert came back from college, his dad had had a stroke, and he had to come here. We had an opportunity to go someplace else to work, but his dad had had a stroke, and they needed him home. So he came back, and he was appointed teacher principal at Dunbar Elementary School in Hobe Sound, Florida. And he lived at home, and he had our daughter with him. We had a little girl by that time. And he applied to the Rural Farm Association for electricity for the houses in the hammock. And it was through Gilbert's efforts that he got the electricity for the people, for the hammock folks, as we were called, hammock folks. But I want to go back and talk about one of my mother-in-law's friends. She wanted me to meet one of her friends in Port Salerno. I had met her black friends, but this was one of her white friends in Port Salerno. She didn't drive at that time, but I did, so we got into the car. We had a 40 Ford and that we came from school with. And she told me where to go, and we went down on the pocket, and there was an old shack of a house. And in this old shack of a house lived an old woman, Mrs. Pendarvis. Mrs. Pendarvis looked just like the old woman of the sea. She dipped snuff. She had the deep ruts in her face. She had the, well, I guess it was like neck length, dirty, blondish hair, the little blue twinkling eyes. And I just wondered why nobody ever took a picture of old lady Pendarvis to show in Martin County as, for Port Salerno, as this is the way it was. She was a nice old woman, and she and Graham were glad to see each other, and Graham wanted her to see her daughter-in-law and her grandchild. And she was just as proud as Punch. I think she had been one of the old women that did the cannon during the years that Gilbert talked about. And it was just something to see. I had never seen anyone that looked like that. But I'm sure that they had been friends for a long time, and they really cared about each other.
I wonder which Pendarvis this was. You know, we have Pendarvis Cove over in Palm City, and Ernie Lyons has written about Pendarvises, but I wonder what her husband's name was.
I don't know. They were fisher people. They worked in the shark industry. Okay. You know that Port Salerno had the shark industry, and you didn't have to wonder where it was. When you got there, you knew, because it was in the air. That's right.
So. Do you know the years, here I should have asked your husband this, but of growing up in the hammock, he was a little boy in Stewart, but then when did they move to the hammock?
Oh, well, they moved from Stewart, and they stayed over on Jupiter Island for a very short time while their house was being built down in the hammock by Reverend, I think it was Reverend Harp. Uh, his mom and dad were considered kind of wealthy in that they made more than most people did, and they only had one child. And they got Reverend Harp to begin building their house. And they built, as most people did, they built a section of it, and then they built another section of it. And the house can be seen now. She let one of the Andersons buy the house because he was not going to tear it down. He moved it to Port Salerno. The house now sits right in back of Tony Anderson's house. Tony Anderson bought the house. It's still a nice little cottage and can be seen right in back of, I don't know the name, if that's 44th Street, 43rd Street, somewhere in there in Port Salerno. But when we get a hankering for remembering, we go by and take a look at the house. That's the house Gilbert grew up in. That's the house I came to as a bride. And I can remember while I was expecting, there was a storm, and I was there with them. Gilbert had gone back to Daytona, and I couldn't understand. Thompsons lived next door, and Gilbert's dad had us to leave to go over to Thompson's house. It was a lull, and we walked over to Thompson's house, and he had me to sit right by the door. Our house was much better, and I couldn't understand this, but finally I understood. Thompson's house sat down on the ground, and our house was better. And he said, well, if it was going to blow, then he could swoop me up and get me out and hold on to a tree like the Indians do. And that was the kind of thinking he did and the kind of person he was. He was just such a lovely person. And I have to say this about Lincoln. After he'd had his stroke and he was really in his last years, he wouldn't let anybody shave him but me. I had never shaved a man in my life. I did. He was just so nice.
And he always had a heavy Bahamian accent.
Oh, sure. He never got rid of that. They didn't want to get rid of that.
And that's probably how he knew what to do in a storm.
Yes.
He had been
Yes.
through a few.
Yes.
Well, I'm just so glad you spoke, because